97% of scientists say there's climate change, it's caused by man, and that it's dangerous. I'm sure we've all heard this, and I would like to explain to you where this came from. It's from a poll taken in 2008 by Dawn Zimmerman, who asked 10,000 or so scientists online 2 questions. Compared with pre-1800 levels, has it warmed? And has human activity played a significant role? About 3,000 responded, many saying yes to both. And many actually saying, well, define significant, what does it mean? 20%, 30%, 60%? It varies for different branches of science. It does not mean most of, and it does not mean all of. Doran and Zimmerman cut the number of respondees back to 79, who had actively published in climate science, of 75 of whom said yes to both. In actual fact, 75 out of 79 is not 97%, it's actually 94%. This is actually an error in Doran and Zimmerman's maths. But the fact is that 75 scientists were those that were taken to give you this figure of 97%. 75 out of 6 million in the world. That is not a consensus. And not only that, they weren't even asked if it's a crisis. All they said was, it's warmed, man has played a part. So, what do scientists actually think? Well, here's a petition from a long time ago called the Oregon Petition Project. Over 30,000 scientists have signed this, and it says there is no convincing scientific evidence that the human release of CO2, methane or other GH gases is causing or will cause in the foreseeable future catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of the climate. There is considerable evidence that the effects will be beneficial. There's a group called Clintel based in Holland who have released 2 letters to the UN in 2019-2022. The first one signed by 500, the second one signed by 1,100. Actually, they've got some more signatures since then. It's actually now 1,400. There is no climate emergency. This is what scientists actually think. So how about CO2 and temperature? On the right, on this graph, we have CO2 today, down at 400 ppm. In the past, it's been as high, and this is this particular chart here, 60 million years, up to 2,000 ppm. Us primates, we evolved at 50 million years ago. Many of today's plants did as well. Many of today's crustaceans did. Oysters, for example, are over 100 million years old, as are sharks. The upper graph shows temperature. As you can see, it was 5 to 10 degrees warmer when we evolved, as did many of the plants on Earth. As you can see by the values on the far right, today it is very, very cold and there's very, very low CO2. We are in a situation where there is actually a lack of CO2 on planet Earth, and much of life is used to much higher levels of CO2. And we know this because 97% or so of the plants on Earth today, they're called C3 plants, evolved during these periods of high CO2. So, what we see today when we expose plants today to higher levels of CO2 is much higher plant growth. Top left, we have a pine tree. Ambient, when this experiment was done, was probably about 350. So it's 350 ppm is the baseline. Add 150, that's how much it grows. Almost double it, that's how much it grows. Add 450, that's how much it grows. Plants like CO2. Plants like warming. Top right is a study by NASA. They have satellites in space called LAI satellites that measure the leaf area index of plants. This was from the 1980s to 2015. And as you can see, the planet is roughly about 20-25% greener. There are some areas of deforestation in red. This is the effect of chainsaws and the effect of man cutting down trees for industry. Bottom left, this is the effect of warming on global precipitation. A 4% increase globally on average some areas slightly drier, some slightly wetter. This also helps plant growth. On the right is global cereal yield. So all cereals, as you can see, many areas doing much better. Crop yields are up. Part of that increase in crop yields is also due to the increase in CO2. Plants like CO2, plants like warmth. There was a period recently called the Holocene climatic optimum, which was roughly about 2 or 3 degrees C warmer globally. The warming seemed to have been concentrated in the northern hemisphere, so the Alps, Scotland, the Arctic, the far north was possibly 5 or 6 degrees warmer than today. During this time, the Sahara was green. We know this because they've put radar through the sand and they've found old riverbeds there. They've also found rock paintings of giraffes and so on, and they can tell by the sand sediments on the southwest coast of that part of Africa that the sand has only been blowing off that part of the coast, because that's the direction of the prevailing wind there, fairly recently. So before that there was no sand. Bottom left, this is a glacier retreat up north, Iceland, Sweden, Alaska, places like that, Greenland, and they're exposing long dead trees, forests. These are the trees that grew many thousands of years ago during this Holocene climatic optimum. And today these trees grow 300 miles to the south. That's how much warmer it was then. Top right, Scotland had a Mediterranean climate. That's probably quite a few degrees warmer. They know this by looking at the silt beds from Loch Ness. Bottom right, glacial growth in the last 12,000 years across the world. Northern hemisphere red, southern hemisphere blue. As you can see, we are currently near the highest extent of glacial growth, being a little ice age in 1700. And if you can see, if you compare that to back between, say, 11,000 and 5,000 BC, glacial growth, apart from the Younger Dryas, which is that period at 8,000 BC, was much less than it is today. We are near the coldest it has been on Earth in the last 10,000 years. So, we're also told that climate change, warming, affects extreme weather. Top left is accumulated cyclone energy globally from NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration in America. The accumulated cyclone energy is not increasing. Top right, strong tornadoes, decreasing. Bottom figure, wildfires in the US, decreasing. You might have heard of the very hot period in the 30s in America, when much of it was desert, or a lot of it became desert farmland. It was a very dry, very warm period in the US, a lot more wildfires. Wildfires have decreased. Alarmism does not constitute evidence. Hard facts do, and there is no evidence to suggest that warming and CO2 is dangerous for the planet. The supposed solution to climate change, wind turbines and solar panels, is not an environmental solution. This top picture is wind turbine blades chopped up and dumped in landfill. That little yellow thing is a big bulldozer. That's how vast it is. That big patch of white dust is cut up fiberglass because these blades are cut up. This stuff is terrible. It gets in your lungs. It's like asbestos. It's really nasty. You can't recycle fiberglass. The best you can do is something called pyrolysis, which is where you cook it up at high temperature. You produce something like natural gas, which you can burn, a black sludge, and glass fibres, which you can use in concrete. That's not recycling. That's called trying to get rid of it. And as you can clearly see, that isn't done, because here it is in landfill. Putting plastics in landfill is not an environmental solution. Solar panels. Huge quantities of toxic metals in them. Here we see them dumped, broken up, leaching those toxic metals into the ground. I believe there is one recycling plant in France, in the entire world, that can recycle solar panels. It's very expensive to do so. And this is why it isn't done. Once the cost of recycling that is, of course, added to the cost of the installation and onto the cost of electricity, you end up with much more expensive electricity. In the meantime, burning natural gas, all that produces is plant food, which makes the planet greener, which you know about. And wind turbines don't blow. We know what happened in September in 2021 when the wind died and electricity prices went up 250% year ahead, 700% day ahead, when many electric companies went under because they were trapped between the cap, the amount they could charge to the end user, and the increase in the cost to them from the wind turbines. About 20 companies went under. The increase in cost of electricity in the UK is having a catastrophic effect on our economy and on people's household income. Going back to the medieval, where we relied on wind power to produce bread, is not a viable solution. It is not the way ahead. There is a better way of doing this. And that future, if you want to get off CO2, nuclear. It's the only one we have that can deliver baseload 24/7 power on demand. And while we have many small medium reactors on order from Rolls-Royce and big nuclear power plants on their way, which will take 10 years or so, the SMRs from Rolls-Royce take about 4 or 5 years to commission. The only viable solution until those come in is to burn gas. Wind turbines and solar panels don't work. And of course, trying to cut CO2 is actually a pointless task, because don't forget that every other country is producing CO2 as well. And many of those countries, India and China, Pakistan, the Middle East, South America, Africa, some, don't care about our CO2 cutting fantasy we have. So whatever we do, CO2 will go up past 500, 600 ppm. And if we get any impacts from that on our weather, we're going to get those anyway. So by far the most effective solution is to adapt to the impacts of climate change and not to try to stop it, because then we can spend the money where and when it is needed. Be it a dam in Africa, be it a seawall in Lincolnshire. It is much cheaper, much more effective to do that.
This video has expressed our initial response to the Torbay Climate Emergency Plan by 7 concerned citizens, supported by 200 or so peaceful and informed demonstrators outside the building where the meeting took place. We represent the views of a growing movement of awakening people across the region, nation and internationally. We must continue to question the science, politics and agendas, and then take the necessary actions. Thank you for staying with us and listening to the videos.